Good morning and welcome to Studio Time with Deb online version. Today what we're going to be doing is talking about brooches and pinbacks and pin stems and all about how to deal with those. There's lots of kinds of brooches and there's the traditional ones with a pin stem, fibulas, pinannular brooches, stick pins, tie tack backs, barrette backs, all kinds of things. There's two books that I highly recommend if you're going to be doing brooches. And one of them is this one. This is Behind the Brooch. And it not only talks about pin stems and stuff, it does some of that, but it talks a lot more about doing decorative backs of brooches so that the backs say something also. Here's the back of the book, which has some nice pictures and stuff on it. That's one book I highly recommend. The other one that I highly recommend about brooches is a book about Madeleine Albright's collection of pins. I don't know how many of you saw the exhibit when it went around. It was in Orange County, I know, for a while. But Madeleine Albright has a collection of pins that when she was working in service, she would wear them, and they often made a political or social comment. And this is a book called Read My Pins. And it's about the pins, what they meant to her, why she wore them, why she loves them. And she has hundreds of pins. And it's a really interesting book and really fun to look at and read. And brooches are really fun for one reason, because you can put them anywhere on your body. You could wear them low, you can wear them high, you can wear them at the bottom of a V like a pendant would be. You can just wear them wherever. You can also pretty easily adapt them to be pendants, and we'll talk about that later in here. So the first thing I'm going to do is to show you slides. So we're going to start with parts. I usually use stainless steel wire for pin stems. You can use sterling, you can use nickel. Fine silver is too soft. Copper is usually too soft, although you can work hard in it. But usually I use stainless just because it is so sturdy and so easy to use. So I get it from McMaster Carr in 1 foot long pieces, and they're straight. I bought some that was coiled, and that is absolutely painful to try to straighten out. So if you get it straight, it's already straight to start with. You can curve this pretty easily, but getting curved stuff perfectly straight in stainless is really not easy at all. Sterling tube that I put the wire into for 20 gauge, I order it from Rio. There's the number for you. For 18 gauge, I get it from Monster Slayer. And because it's a little bit heavier wall and it works really well, and I'll show you why we want that heavier wall. Now, when you're cutting your stainless wire, one of the things that you want to be really careful about is that you use cutters that are designed to cut stainless steel. If you use your orange handled cutters or other jewelry cutters, you are going to put a little notch in them that will be there forevermore. And I'm sure that most of you have a pair that look like that. Don't use those. Don't use those for stainless, because I guarantee they're going to be a problem. What I did on Amazon, I gave you the ones that I have bought before, but there's other ones out there as well, and they'll work fine. What you have to do is, I just searched for stainless steel wire cutters. Now, the deal is, when you do that, sometimes they will come up with wire cutters that are made of stainless. You need to read the description and be sure that they're designed to cut stainless, that the little, the teeth, not teeth, but the cutting edges are sharp enough and hard enough that it's not going to notch them when you use it. Okay. This is what we want a pin stem to look like, not the top one, the bottom one. We want that long taper. The longer the taper, the easier it's going to go through your clothing. And notice that it is not super pointed. Notice this one is super pointed, and this one is rounded on the end. We want it slightly rounded on the end. And the reason we want that is because clothing is made of threads that are twisted fibers. And what we want to do is to separate those fibers. We don't want to pierce the thread. If you pierce the thread, what's going to happen is it will tear. It'll make a hole. And so we want something that'll gently separate the fibers so that it'll go through nicely, and then you won't have a problem with it tearing your clothes. This is the first thing that I do when I'm making a pin stem, is that I take a piece of 2 to 3 inches of the tubing and 2 to 3 inches of square wire, and I solder them together with hard solder. The reason I do this first is because I've got a piece that I can clean up that's long enough that I can actually handle it. Otherwise, what I end up with is I'm working with these tiny, tiny, tiny little parts that are very hard to work with. So if I do this, I can do one for 18 gauge and I can do one for 20 gauge. And then what I have is I have this in stock that I can just cut off however wide a piece I want for a pin stem. And that works really well for me. This is what a traditional pin stem is going to look like. And I want to show you the parts, and then I'm going to show you some pictures of it. So this is a 3-knuckle hinge. This pin stem is soldered onto the middle knuckle. There's a block right here. This block, what this does is the pin stem hits that block so that it stays up above wherever the catch is going to be, okay? And what that does is that it puts pressure on the catch so that the catch then it isn't just capturing the end of the wire. There's actually pressure on that wire holding it up so that it doesn't tend to come out. This is a secondary kind. This one is 1 pin stem and one tube, and the pin stem goes up here through the tube and then back down. This is bent so that this touches the bottom of the brooch, touches the back of the brooch before this will fasten, before the stem will fasten into the catch. And then that way it again puts pressure on the catch. This one can work the same way. This is a tube with the square wire underneath it. This is the pin stem that gets pulled into it. And I'll describe this later, but basically what happens is on the pin stem, on the back end here, what we're gonna do is to flatten it a little bit and then pull it through really hard so it's a pressure fit. So it gets pulled into there, and then it's very, very stable. You can also solder this if it's stainless, but if you solder the stainless, you want to be darn sure not to anneal it, because if you anneal it right here, it will always bend right here. So you want to be sure that you have stainless sticking out the back end, that you put cool jewel or something right here, and that you solder back here only, just tack solder it. I don't recommend soldering it. There's really not a need to. If you take and flatten your stainless wire and pull it through, the pressure fit works really well. And this is just with a block of metal instead. So you can use like a giant square wire, a giant round wire. I'll show you some later. If you use a piece of tubing, you're also going to want to use tubing the other direction. I'll show you what I mean. So these are some sample brooches, just to show you the back of them. This is a catch made out of tubing. So it's just got a little notch filed in it, and it's got to be heavy wall tubing or it's going to give up, right? And then this is a stainless steel wire. It comes across here, through here, and you can see how this touches right here. So when this gets, and see how this is up against the top edge of this catch? The reason it is because there's pressure on it from right here. This is another one. This is just a piece of tubing. So this one did have the wire flattened and then pulled through really hard. And then this is the end of the brooch just pulled over. This is what I was talking about the tube. So Charity Hall does a lot where in the tops of these tubes, if she uses a tube on the back, she tube sets a stone. And so it makes it just a really special little piece. This side is the catch, and it has a notch that's carved up in it. I usually do that with a separating disc. I just slice a diagonal up, and then I come in and with a file make it wide enough to easily accept the pin stem. But you don't want it any bigger than it needs to be. You want to keep it relatively small, relatively fitting. This is the side I was talking about. If I just take the wire and I try to pull it through this tube only, there's not enough there to hold it. I could solder it, but then I guarantee it's going to be annealed over here. So if I take and put a tube through this one, solder that tube in, and then pull the pen stem through, again with it being flattened, then that'll work really well. That'll hold really well. This one, I'm sorry, it's blurry. I'll show you better pictures of this. This is a Barret finding. So this has the two of them. It has the tube on a square wire, and then it has the two pin stems coming down and being a catch down there. This is what the catch looks like when you've got the Barret one. And you can also just slice it in half for a hook. Do the same thing. These are, again, some sample pieces. I want you to note the tube right here that, again, so the wire on this one goes through this bottom tube, or through this tube right here, makes a corner, comes through the tube right here, and then up. So that when it's unfastened, the pin stem wants to stay up in the air like that. That's where the pressure is on it. It stays up. So you push it down and then slide this in, and then that's going to capture that tube. That's going to capture that pin stem. And because there's pressure on that, it's not going to come open, not without pulling on it. This is another one, again, two tubes soldered together. The wire goes through this tube, and then up. Okay, and again, because you put it in there, it's got pressure on it, it's going to tend to stay put. This one, similar. So this one goes through the tube here to hold it in place, through here, and then here. Now this one wants pressure going this direction, okay? And so you can see that the pin stem is open that direction, so you pick it up, put it in there, and it snaps into place right there. This is a really simple one. This one's going to be a little bit tall. And the reason, I didn't go over the reason why we do the square wire. One of the reasons we do the square wire, the main reason we do the square wire, is because you're pinning these into fabric, right? So if your tube is directly on the back of the brooch that the pin stem goes through, there's no room for fabric. So it depends on what it is you're going to pin into. This one would be perfect if you're pinning into something like a sweater or a coat or something that's really thick, because it accommodates something really thick. If you pin this one onto a blouse, what's going to happen is it's going to tend to fall forward because this is too much space. So you have to think about what your pin is for, what you're designing for. This is a beautiful one. This is a piece of tubing that was rounded here. One end of the wire is made into a hook. The wire is fed all the way through the tubing and then comes around. And it's a really beautiful little pin. This is another one that's really beautiful, I think. It's just a piece of square wire. The pin is, or the pin, yeah, is stuck in here on one side, and I would do it again by flattening the stainless wire and pulling it through the hole. And then up here is carved into it a notch so that it fastens. This one is two round wires, and you can see, I hope you can see, this one, this leg is going to touch first. So it holds this up in the air so that there's pressure on it when it's pushed up into here. This is an interesting one. This is one that comes apart. So this one, it's kind of a cross between a stick pin and a traditional pin. So this little ball gets put right in here. And then the pin stem gets put into here from the back. So here's what it looks like. And it would be worn. This goes through the cloth. Here are some more. These are fold formed. You can see where they latch and how they go. This is another one. Cold connected on one end and then long on the other. This is Monica's piece. Actually, it's my piece now. I have it, but it's Monica made this, and it's a really beautiful piece. It's got, again, notice the tubing here that goes through the forged element, And then on this side, this is a little blurry, but right here, you can see where the catch is. I have some more shots of it. Still a little blurry. That's better. So on the back of this now, you can see the tube here, it comes across and then catches here. So when this is open, do I have an open? Yeah, you can see how the pin stem goes straight, goes up there. So that when it's closed, it puts pressure up against here and tends to stay on. This is a really traditional one, and I wanted to talk to you about using traditional pin backs. So this is ones you can buy that you solder this end on, you solder this end on, and then you assemble it. You can use traditional ones really easily, or parts of traditional ones. Sometimes you might want to use the hinge end and not the catch. The catch on these is a little trickier. Normally what we do with these is to flow solder on the back of them first and then put them in position and then heat around them and solder them. And you also normally use easy solder for putting them on. You have to be really careful about the catch end, that you don't get solder to flow up into the catch, because if it does, then it's not going anywhere. True for the hinge too, but it doesn't tend to do it as much in the hinge. This is one of Charity's pieces. Again, notice the tubing. It comes around and then she's got a really beautiful catch. And notice how pretty the back is. She always does pretty backs. This is a roller printed piece with a cold captured stone, and this is the pin on the back. So I'm going to go back to the front real quick. So you can see it's just got this little line across here. But what happens is there's a tube on one side and then the catch on the other side, right there. These are traditional, fairly traditional single stem. This is a single stem. This is a mochame piece. This has a piece of tubing right here, and then a handmade catch here. And when it's open, this does go up, and yeah, see how it springs up? And the reason this doesn't need a block under it is because it has the space under it because of where this is attached. This is one, you can see the pin stem coming across the back here. This is the front of a piece. This is the back of it. What I want you to notice on this is twofold. It's got a hook here, but see right here where it curls? It does that to increase the springiness of it. So a lot of times if you're soldering a pin stem on, what happens is it gets annealed. Even if it's stainless steel, it gets annealed. And then every time you bend it, it tends to stay where it gets bent to, and it tends not to be springy. And what you can do to increase that is to do a little curl of some sort or a wrap around. I'm going to show you a lot more of those as it goes on. This one is really unique. Let's see if I can blow this up. It's not a great picture of it, but the pin stem and what holds this thing in place, this what looks like paper, probably plastic, is one piece. So it's got a little clip here, and you can see the hook. There's the hook, the end of it. And then it has a clip. It comes across, has a clip, comes across, and there's the pin stem. Really interesting way to do things you can't solder on or don't want to solder on. This is another one made from one piece of wire. So it goes through the square wire and through the square wire. What it does is to come over, it starts here, wraps around, goes through the square wire, gets dented in, wraps around, and then goes into the hook. So you can see where this one wraps around, makes the hook, right? And then wraps around and makes the pin. This is one that has the leg that sits down that makes the pin stem want to stay up in the air. But notice that they made it decorative. It looks really nice. It just goes through the tube. It could just be a short wire, but by making it something decorative that's kind of interesting, it makes it more fun. Also notice this pin stem. So there's no reason that pin stems can't do that. There's no reason they can't bend or curve or do all sorts of stuff. It will make a difference in how the pin hangs, and you need to think about that. Normally pin stems either go top to bottom or they're on the top third of the piece. but not always. So sometimes you have to play with them some to see how they're going to do, and especially when it's something so dimensional like this piece. So this one probably sucks in quite a ways and goes down. So when you're wearing it, it might suck it close to your clothes, even though it's not on the top third so much.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Going back, do you think they soldered down that little squiggle piece?
No, 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 no,
Okay.
no. No, I think it's just there to add tension to this piece. So, and this looks like to me, it looks like it's stainless and it's not soldered at all. This is a beautiful one. So this is the brooch. The piece comes off here, makes some circles, comes around, and then there's a piece of tubing here. You can kind of see if I can blow it up. Piece of tubing right here. And there's a piece of tubing right here that it sits in. And then this one has the piece of tubing, a piece of wire, and then another piece of tubing. That is the catch, this piece of tubing right there. This one, so this one is a combination. This is round wire. It has a traditional little catch. This one is a little bit different. So what this one is, it has a hole drilled in it. It has the wire that comes through here, but then it comes up and over, and this is hinged. Kind of an interesting adaptation. This one I wanted to show you only because, number one, it's not going to work for anything except something knitted or something really, with big holes in it. There is no way that you're going to put that pin stem through anything that's even slightly, normally worn. That has to be for something that's got great big holes in it. The other thing is having a rough pin stem like this is usually not advised. You want something that's going to be smooth, that's going to go through really smoothly. As big as this one is, having it be rough is probably irrelevant. This is another traditional one that they use square tubing rather than round tubing. You can use either one. It doesn't really matter. You just want something for it to go through that's going to be stable. This again hits the back of the brooch prior to this. And this is just a little tab stuck out here. Notice how he made this decorative. It's got the two little pieces here and the little capstones they look like. So notice how decorative the back is and how finished, how beautiful. This is one made of one piece of wire. The wire comes up, over, around, all the way around, 3 pieces of tubing and around. And so what you do is to push it down and then to the side and it'll open up. This is a Calder piece. Notice how on his pin stem, so there's a hole drilled right here. And that hole stabilizes that wire. So he stuck it through the hole, wrapped it around, came around here, and then across, and there you go. See how he captured it by wrapping it? Okay, it goes around there, through, and back. This one is relatively traditional again. It's got the pin stem that just goes down, touches the back of the brooch, and then a little sterling silver catch. This is another one of Monica's pieces that I own, that I love. And the pin stem is in the back. It's right here. And she's just got a little hook right here to hold it. This is a fairly traditional catch. So Monica, are you there?
Yes, I am. I'm so surprised to see this.
Why? I love this piece.
No, I just remember like there's a whole, this is called round peg square hole.
So on this, is this a traditional catch? You didn't make this catch, right?
Yeah, I did not make that. That's traditional, yeah.
Yeah, but you did make the hook, and it looks like you made it out of an earring part.
No, I think that was like a little sheet, then a jump ring, and then a wire.
Oh my gosh, that's too difficult. Okay, so guys, I don't know. Monica wants to work hard. What I would do with this is I would use an earring part with a pad on it. I would solder that pad down and I'd bend that little sucker into a hook. You can get the fattest ones that are around. They're usually 20 gauge. Sometimes you can find ones that are 19. They're a little bit fatter. I would use that and make that into a little hook and be done with it. There's no way that I would do all that and solder that assembly. But good job, Monica. The next series I'm going to show you is from Fred, and he does a lot of these fibula parts. So this is, again, the tube with the wire pulled through after it's been flattened, and this part is forged and just folded over. I'm going to go fairly quickly through these. This is the back of it. And there you can see how the pin stem wants to stay up so it stays fastened. And he does a whole bunch of these. He's really known for these. Oh, this is Charity. Charity Hall's piece. And this is the back. Look how beautiful this is. Tube set stone in the catch. Look over here. So rather than just a block of metal to make this pin stem have tension on it, she put this horseshoe shaped piece in here and a piece of tubing on the wire. And it's just a beautiful little hinge over there. This is a nice one. Again, 2 pieces of tubing. This one has a slit in the back so that the piece just goes in there, but look how it just echoes. It reads well as the whole piece. This is a piece that I have that's, it was an exchange piece that I did. I didn't make this. This was the one I got in exchange. And it's got a nice little hinge. It's got a Barret hinge, sorry. And the Barret hinge, pin back, let me tell you about these a little bit. They're usually used for either bigger brooches or heavier brooches. And the reason is it gives you 2 pin stems to use, right? The problem with them is that it's often difficult to get 2 pin stems into your fabric at once, and especially if they splay open very much. So what we want ideally is for them to stay parallel to each other, even when we open them up. So the tension to hold them in place has to come from a block or something up here, because it can't come from them being splayed open. If that happens, then getting them into your fabric is very, very difficult. So on this one, you can see how this block that's right here makes this pin stem stay up in the air, so that when I go to fasten it, it has enough pressure. Look at that, it even bows. Now, ideally on this brooch, this should have been wider. This should have covered from maybe 1/3 of the brooch dimension. If the block that you put in is too tall, you can always use a round file it out just a bit so that the pin stem sits exactly where you want it to. And there's the catch. The catch ideally, I'm sorry?
Why should it be wider? You said ideally it would
more
be
stable. Because think about it, you got 2 pin stems coming down, it's going to be much more stable if it's wider. It's like hanging a pendant. If you hang it from 2 things that are far apart, it's much more stable. If you hang it from a single point, it's not so stable. So if you have a brooch that's really wide or something, you know, really big, really heavy, you definitely want the Barret kind of finding. The distance here ought to be not much bigger than the pin stem, and ideally you should almost snap it in.
Deb, I have a question about the blocks.
Uh-huh.
Now, they always go, that one looks like it's behind. Is that, so the wire always goes over the block, right?
Right, it's the block that supports the wire that holds it up in the air, that makes it stay up in the air.
As it's going towards the latch.
Yes.
Okay.
The block is between the tube and the latch, the clasp.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
And
here
the
you can
height,
see it. It's right here.
and the height of the block is determines.
Height of the
how
block
much
is
tension-
determined by
tension-
how much tension you need on these wires.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. This is another one, a real traditional look of the saw, and you can do that with a jeweler's saw. You can saw that out, file it. This is another one of Charity's. This is the front. This is the back. Number one, look how beautiful this is. So number two, this is the catch, but look again at this hinge and how beautifully she's decorated it. It's got, again, a piece of wire here so that when the pin stem comes over, it'll have tension on it. But it's just got a beautiful little hinge there. This is one of Charity's. I own this piece. And this is the back of it, very
Charity's
traditional
last
catch
name?
here. But look again, this one, to support this wire so that it holds it up in the air, like that. So when it's not fastened, see how the pin stem hits right here. So that I have to push this pin stem down in order to latch it, and that holds it in place.
Thank you, George.
And here you can see it a little bit better where she's carved out grooves right here. This is another one of hers. Notice how pretty the back is. This one, look at these tabs. How fun is that? And they're very reminiscent of the shapes going around here. It's a nice compliment. Same with this one. Fancy little tabs to hold it in place. This one is going to have trouble because when you go to put these pin stems in, if you put them in and they're parallel, and that's fine, then when you snap them, they're going to bunch up your fabric. So ideally, you want this so that they are parallel when they are snapped in place. This should have been wider or the tube a little narrower, one of the two, so that it doesn't bunch up your fabric. This one has the bar, rather than being right here, it's down in here. And it could be that it has something to do with whatever's on the front. I don't know. This one also latches a little bit like a safety pin so that the pin comes across, up, and over.
If that one is closed like that and that bar is there, would that allow it to give pressure against the fabric to kind of hold it?
It would,
steady?
absolutely. And maybe too much pressure depending on what fabric it is. This is another one. Again, these pin stems, this would have to be worn on, this one has a real problem actually. So this one would have to be worn on something that's really big, like a knitted something or a crocheted something with a lot of heft to it. And you can see there is no room here, none. That tube is right on the back of this. So this one, and plus their angle, this whole thing has a lot of issues. Not going to function well, although it's really pretty. This is the more traditional barrette back, more traditional barrette backs. This is made with the round wires as the catch and also the little legs. This is a very traditional one again. Again, notice the little block. Now we're going to talk about fibulas or these are adaptations of fibulas, but this is where the wire comes around and it circles. And so this is where people are using sterling. And a lot of times this coil, you need at least one little coil to coil it up to make it springy enough. If you do lots of little coils, it just makes it interesting. So I'm going to show you a series of these. These are all Fred's, made with one piece of wire. He teaches a lot of fibula classes. They do a lot of samples of different possibilities, and they coil the wire a lot. That makes it, you can see the coil on one end there. This is a sample. Again, the end isn't sharp, so it's not a finished piece, it's just a sample. Most of these ones you see forged, they're forged or formed from one piece of wire.
Deb, can you talk about the design issue
of how you envision a piece where that top pin is going to basically disappear once you wear it?
It sort of disappears. I mean, it usually you can see it on one end and a little bit on the other end, and usually visually you go ahead and complete that. You know, it's if you block that out, I think you still have a lot of the visual. And then what a lot of people do is to make this just that much more important, right? So this part gets hung on the fabric, but this is what shows. This one uses a stainless wire in here. So it has a piece of tubing over here and then it's a catch over here. So that's not all one piece of wire like a lot of them are. Yeah, I would just, you know, this is the brooch, but I think with a fibula, a lot of times because you see that the top of that wire going through anyway, you kind of read it in. This is one where it's hidden. So this one you wouldn't read in at all. This one would be mostly hidden. That one again is going to be a real problem. But I think these are designed for like knits, shawls.
Deb, I have a question. Is there a standard measurement for like where the end of the pin stem should end? Like, or is that just
I like the pin stems to stick out a little bit on from the end of the piece. It shouldn't show from the front, number one. But I like them to stick out a little bit from the clasp so that I can put a finger on them and grab them, but not much. You want just barely, 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 right? Because if you do much at all, then it's going to stab you, number one, but it's also going to be more likely to come undone. So you want to be careful about that. So I usually have them stick out just a little bit, maybe a millimeter. Susan, you asked about this. This is where it goes through. So you can see that this one comes across and over, goes through to here, but you can see it still, you kind of complete that visually, even though it's not there. Again, notice the pin stem goes way up when it's, so that it has pressure when it's hooked. So some of these are a little bit like safety pins, if you look at them. These have a similar mechanism back here to get the springiness, and then they just snap in. And then I've got, oh, this one is, notice how the brooch parts on these, this is William Harper. Notice how the brooch parts are integral to the design. They're just part of it. They show and they're, you know, they lead you down into the rest of it. This is Joanna Goldberg's. Interesting how the sidewall here, the wire that comes all the way up from the bottom is also the hook. So again, the frame of the piece is the pin back. These, I've got a couple in here that are kind of like safety pins, and these are really easy to make. So you take your piece of wire, you sharpen the one end, you fasten one end in one side and the other end curl over, and you've got something that works like a safety pin. They're kind of fun. These are all literally like safety pins, but with decorations on them. So one of the things that I love is a pinannular brooch. And I don't know if you guys know what that is, but I'm going to describe it to you. So they're like the old Celtic ones that you see often. They're, what you do, the pin stem on this slips. It slips around on here. It's loose, but it won't come off because of the ends. So what you do is that you flip it over, you put the pin stem into the fabric, you flip this over, push it back, and then slide this on there. And because the ends are big, this won't come out and it stays put. It's really nice for shawls and things like that. It's kind of I always love them. I think they're beautiful. So here are some different ones that I'm going to show you. So the last thing I want to talk to you about is, I said you can easily change a brooch into a pendant. If the pin stem is vertical, then it's really easy to just slip a chain underneath it, right? And as long as you've got enough tension on the pin stem is not going to come open, you can just slip a chain under there and wear it as, you know, and it'll be fine. But you can also make something like this. And what you want to do with this is that the piece of tubing right here needs to be exactly the length of your pin stem from catch to hinge. And that's so that when you put it on there, it's not going to slide around at all. It's going to fit tight. All right. And then you could put whatever kind of bail you want at whatever kind of angle you want. So if this piece hung the other direction, I could have a bail that came off here, off the top, not obviously the top of the tube, but off this edge, and was here. This one hangs horizontally, so it's going to be like this. These are commercially available. The problem with commercially available ones is that, like I said, the tube needs to be exactly the right size. So what you have to do is to get one that's larger than what you really need it to be, and then cut it down. And I find even the longest ones are sometimes not long enough to do what I want to do. So I end up a lot of times making my own. Pretty much always I make my own. This is the brooch. I've shown you guys this before from the scoring and bending one, right? This is the front of the brooch. This is the back of the brooch. I don't know if you noticed, but the pin stem that's on this guy trades off as, it's back here. See it in the back right here? It goes all the way down. Okay. So what that does right here, this is a piece of square tubing that is the same size as the square wire that I have here. So that when this is put together, you don't even notice that it's there. But I can slip it off the pin stem, wear it as a brooch, or I've got this soldered onto it and I can wear it as a pendant. Here it is in place. And you can see it fits snug against here, and then it fits snug right up in here. So it's right up in there, sorry. So it's snug all the way across there. So it can't slide around. I want to talk to you a little bit more about sharpening the point, because that's the part that's kind of tricky. And so I'm going to do a little demo for you. And
before you do that, could I see the front of that last piece? I mean, the back of that last piece when it's a pin before you converted it to the pendant?
Yeah, but I'm going to do it on the video. So let me change over to video. Okay, so this piece, this is the top of it. Oh, right there. Angle this up a touch. There. There. And so you can see the tubing on it. It's got a little catch down here. And this one is tight. I have to really pull this one through. And then the tubing just slips off. See what I did?
Yes.
So the tubing, I'll put it back. The tubing just slips on like this. I thought there would be questions about this. And then this snaps into place. And it snaps hard. Like that.
Okay. I completely misunderstood that one. Great.
Yeah, so you can make any kind of tubing fit on whatever to for the pin stem, the critical part is that it's tight from here to here. And that's especially true if it hangs horizontally. If it hangs horizontally and it's not tight, it'll slip one way or the other, right? It won't be stable. So this one is tight, tight, tight in here. It doesn't go anywhere. Okay.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. So
Do you have a tip on how to match the curve of the pin stem and the tube you're sliding over it?
The tube will kind of force the issue. So they don't have to be exact, they just have to fit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be exact. It really, let's look at this one again. So I'm not even sure they are exact. They may not be. They're not, look. So my stainless wire will conform to what my tube is. Can you see that? They're close, but they're not exact. See how the pin stem curves more? But when I use 20 gauge, which is what I normally like to use, when I use 20 gauge of stainless wire, it's pretty flexible. And so what that means is that when I take this and I take the tube and shove it up here, that stainless, and now it's tight. So that also buys me, because they're not exactly the same, it's not going to fall off, right? It's here, it's stable, it's on there. What I do with this is stainless wire, and I chuck it up into the flex shaft. And you've got to be a little bit careful with this, because when you spin this, or you can see it's flexible, right? It wiggles around. So that's one reason that I like the straight ones from McMaster Carr. And then I just cut them to 3 or 4 inch lengths, whatever it is that I need. And then I'm going to use a relatively coarse sandpaper. This is 240. Sometimes I use 120. And what I want to do is to push this down on here. I want to have my flex shaft kind of next to the bench, almost sitting on the bench, so that I'm resting this way, because what I want is that long taper, right? And then I'm just going to close this over it. Now, this does get hot under your finger, so you'll want to move it. And I do this for a while until I think that that taper is nice and long and good. Once I think it's good, I test it, and I test it on 2 fabrics always. I test it on my apron fabric to see if it'll go through, which it will. And then I test it, if it'll go through the apron fabric, then I test it on a something more like a knit. And do it on a knit that you don't really care about, because if it's not sharp enough or if it's too rough, it's going to make holes in it. Then what I'm going to do is go down to a finer sandpaper. I like this green stuff. I'm going to use that to kind of polish it. Okay. And that should make it nice and smooth. You should be able to feel with a fingernail, you shouldn't be able to feel any little ridges in there. It should be nice and smooth. And if it's nice and smooth, then you should be able to take a knitted fabric and easily pierce through it. And when it comes out, it's fine. So that's what we're looking for with a pin stem. And that's the way I handle them. And then I take them out, and if I need to, I'll cut the long end, the far end. Any questions?
You talked about it being roundish at the tip. Do you dull the edge tip or anything, or?
Only
is
if
it
I
still
get
just-
it that sharp. So I feel with my finger, and if it's like, if I push moderately hard and it'll draw blood, it's too sharp. I don't want to do that. I want it. So, you know, with sewing machines, they talk about having a ball end on their needles. And that's exactly why. It's the same thing. I want something that's a little bit dull. This one is not real sharp right now. Sometimes I do get them too sharp. And if I do get them too sharp, I will dull them. I just take a piece of sandpaper. Again, I will spin this, and then just at a little bit of an angle, I'll dull the tip so that it's not a real sharp tip. because a real sharp tip is not going to help you. It's going to tear up your fabric more than you think. Any other questions?
I do have a question, Deb. You talked about flattening the stainless steel pin and shoving it through the tube. I don't quite
Yes.
understand how that works.
Oh, let me show you. So this one isn't sharpened. This is just a piece of stainless wire, okay? And these are cheap, sleazy pliers because I don't want to use good pliers. And what I'm going to do is to take the very end of this. I'm going to squish it for all I'm worth. Can you see? Probably can't. Let me squish it again. It's subtle, but you can see where I squished it?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I can see where I squished it. It bulges out a little bit. That's all you need, just a little bulge like that.
For those of us who don't have your iron strong hands, could you hammer it a little bit gently to flatten it?
Yes, you can, but if you are doing this with a hammer, that the stainless is likely to mar your hammer and or your bench block and or anvil or whatever. So what you want to do is to be using something that you know is icky, like a really, you know, a bench block you don't care about, a hammer you don't care about, something like that, so that you can do that and not worry that it gets nicks in it. Okay. You can also, you could use a pair of round nose pliers. Again, I would do something really cheap, you know, the cheap round nose pliers, so that you can just squish them and not worry about marking up the pliers, because it will mark up the pliers. So what I do, Susan, then is this, and then you just pull it through the piece of tubing. When it gets to the point where it bulges out a little bit, there, bulges out a little bit on the top. When it gets to that point, then what you're going to do is to grab the other end, and you're going to pull really hard, because it's a press fit in there anyway, and you're going to be pulling that in. And once you do, it's pretty stable in there. If there's a little bit that's sticking out the end, out the bulged end, you can take a file and file that off. Again, be sure it's not one of your really good expensive files. You want to be using a cheap file, a steel file. But you can file that off till it's flat. Okay.
And you're only pinching just a little part of it, not a lot of it?
Not a lot of it. Once you pull it up into that soft metal, up into that tube, it's really not going to go anywhere. Yeah. And if it's a sloppy fit, then you've got a problem. You might have to bulge it a lot more. But usually if it's a tight fit at all, if it's the ones that I specified, you won't have any trouble. Just pull it up in there, pull it really tight, and it'll stay put.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else?
Deb, how did you bend your square without mushing it?
The tubing?
Yes.
I bend a lot of tubing just with my hands very gently. And the reason I do it with my hands very gently is, and it doesn't take a lot of hand strength, obviously, because it's tubing. But the reason I do that very gently is because I can feel when it starts to give way and kink, and then I can stop. So I would just, you need a piece that's longer than what you want. If you want something this big, you make something this big, and you put your thumbs up into it and just pull very, very gently. And the ends you can't ever get to curve around much. So sometimes I can use one that has a straight segment and then it curves. Sometimes I need the curve in the middle, and then I have two straight segments I have to cut off. But very gently with my hands. You could also put it around something. So like a large bracelet mandrel or the horn of an anvil, something like that. And push very gently. But you really want your fingers on it, because you can feel when it starts to kink, when it starts to give way. And then that's time to stop. Practice with copper and you'll be able to feel it. You'll be able to tell. Okay, sometimes you can anneal and then bend it more, but usually once it starts flattening like that, it flattens. There's ways that you can bend things into hoops and whatnot, but we generally don't want something bent that much. So we don't we don't go that far with it.
So in the catch that you're using for the pendant doohickey that goes on the pin stem,
Mhm.
at the end of it, it looked like you had a square bend rather than a nice curved bend.
That's a piece of square wire that was soldered onto the tube. Let me find here. This is a piece of square wire soldered onto this tube. That's the pin stem. That's what it looks like. That's square wire soldered onto square tube. See how it's soldered on?
That's much easier than what I was thinking.
So I didn't do much curving to the tube. I just did a little bit of curving to the tube. The tube curves ever so slightly.
Can I ask a question, Deb? Because we've curved stuff. We curved it before for different tubing, and what we did was we put a piece of wire that was close to the size of the tubing inside,
Mhm.
and then we used that to help bend it. And
Yeah.
that's how you and I have done it for pieces like when I'm putting on backs where I want it curved, not straight.
Yeah, so that works really well to help keep it from collapsing. The deal is you can only curve it a little bit if you do that. Otherwise, you can't get the wire out, right? If you curve it very much at all, then the wire won't come out. So if you're just curving it a little bit, that can work really well. I find often I don't need to do that, but if I've got thin wall tubing, I will need to do that. So it kind of depends on the tubing that I'm using and what's happening with what I want it to look like, how much I want to curve it, and also what the material is. Copper and silver tend to bend much easier. Brass tends to collapse pretty easily. So it depends on what it is. Anything else? Okay, thank you for joining me today for this session of Studio Time with Deb Online. And hopefully I will see you next week with a new topic. If you have ideas, let me know, things you want to learn. I don't guarantee I'll cover them right away, but I'm spending a lot of time figuring out a lot of stuff and how to cover this. So I hope to see you next week.